Hi, Bobby. Just getting ready here. 1 second. Okay. How's everyone tonight? It's nice to see you here. I'm just loading it up. I hope that everyone had the chance to, if they haven't seen the text, I'm also sending it again here from Svaria. So it's right there in the comments. If you have a chance to download the text, it's right there. And I'd love to see your comments and your little hearts and likes, or if you laughs and things, because I'm in my room all by myself, and it's hard to know who is here and who's not there. So, the more you interact, the more I have a chance to understand how people are experiencing this. So, as we get started, I just want to throw out a couple of things here that are happening across the Valley Beth Shalom community. As many of you know, we have gone completely digital as of today, and there are a few things I want to just give a couple of announcements at the beginning about before we get started with our teaching. One is the number one place to go for all things online is our website, www.vbs.org. And if you go there and / to VBS at home, you'll see a list of resources there. Everything from recorded videos to volunteer opportunities to links to the schedule for all of our live events. So it's all there, and I would definitely suggest that you go there. In addition, there's so much that's been going on all day today. Hey, hi Laura, nice to see you, and thank you for the comment. It's really important that you spend this time being with your family and hanging out, and also thinking about how long this could go and trying to build in those steps for yourself. So at VBS, we launched several new initiatives, and I want to tell you about them for just 1 minute. One is called VBS Helping Hands. It's a service where we're trying to connect certain people to other people if they need help. So there's a big segment of our community. We have thousands of people here at VBS, and there's a big segment that are supposed to stay at home. They can't leave it during this time. So we have another segment. In fact, just a few minutes ago, I got off a video conference with 20 teens from all over VBS. And some of them are drivers, and all of them have phones, and they can all make phone calls. And they've all agreed to be part of VBS Helping Hands. And the idea is that they can maybe go to the pharmacy or go to the grocery store or pick up laundry or do things for our elderly community. And that's one of the things we're really proud of, and it's beginning to take root even just in this first day. The second one is called VBS Connected Conversations, and that's similar, except that rather than driving and maybe doing errands, it's just picking up the phone and finding a phone buddy and talking with that phone buddy for someone especially who's isolated. So our teens are also going to be doing that, but we want to invite everyone who can, everyone who's able to maybe sign up and do that. And maybe if I have a chance, I'll try to put some links up to that a little bit later. Or if anyone who is working at VBS who might be watching this can put links up to those forums, that would be really great. So there'll be a chance for younger people and people who are more able-bodied and can get out and are allowed to be out and about to do something for someone else. That's called VBS Helping Hands, VBS Helping Hands, and VBS Connected Conversations. And then lastly, because we have a full-service caterer on staff who produces food for all over campus, called LA Kosher, we've decided to launch, starting tomorrow, I think, Wednesday and Friday, curbside pickup food service, so that if you're having a hard time figuring out what to make for dinner, or the kids are going crazy or what have you, let us take care of that. It's of course there's a small fee for that, and the number is 818-789-7588. Those are a chance for you to launch that. So this entire week we're rolling out online learning, broadcasts, learning like this, these chesed opportunities to do loving acts of loving kindness, and even the food service is trying to jump in to help everyone else out. So we are trying very hard to just keep everyone in the loop and to keep everyone involved and to make sure that nobody feels alone, which is the last announcement. If you are home and you are feeling a little lonely or a little down or a little anxious, then you feel free to call the synagogue. There will always be someone there, 788-6000, and it'll be a chance for you to connect with someone and then be reconnected to our community. And then if you enjoy this and you enjoy other videos by VBS and other broadcasts, please like our page on Facebook, share our content, enjoy the videos, let other people know, because that's how we know that we're affecting other folks. So that's all I'm asking for is for participation. All right, so tonight on this first VBS at Home evening, I'm going to do a little study on what's called resiliency in times of crisis. So the word resiliency in so many ways means being able to be flexible and being able to understand what it means to fail at something or to feel struggle with something and then to overcome it. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. If you have the text study, if you have those texts, you can go ahead and take them out now. If you take a look on the piece of paper that or on the text from Safaria that I put together, there is a painting. It's one of my favorite paintings. It's by Vincent van Gogh. It's of irises. It's hanging here in Los Angeles in the Getty Museum. And it is considered to be a masterpiece. It was considered at one point one of the most expensive paintings in the world. Van Gogh's ability to use heavy paint and knife work to create lightness and air is something that's really, truly amazing. Every one of the irises that he paints in this painting is unique. It's not just the white one. Every single one is unique. And it's considered to be one of the most greatest and beautiful paintings ever created, except that Van Gogh never saw the fruits of his labor. Van Gogh, for all intents and purposes, felt himself to be a failure. He, in a world before mental health was considered something to study and practice and to be looked after, he struggled mightily. In fact, he took his own life at one point. And I have this painting here because I think about what was the world that he entered and how did he see himself? And what was that like in terms of his sense of resiliency and how he dealt with crisis? He was a failed art dealer. He didn't do very well in business, and he was a very prolific painter. So the way that he entered into his sense of crisis and how he dealt with his own mental health when he could was that he created. And he created art. And he created art that became really important, seminal artworks that changed how art was made forever. Unfortunately, he never saw that. He never saw the fruits of those labors. And so I put his artwork up first because it invokes for me much of what I want to focus on tonight, is how we create the world that we want to see, even in times of crisis. There's some models for that. So in the Trojan War, his nephew was kidnapped, and he had to go and rescue him. And then God asked of him these very significant. Take a look at Exodus. If you take a look at Exodus, you'll be able to see in the second text, I guess I got booted off there for a minute. If you look at the Exodus text, which is the second text, I think that's actually the text I want to focus on first with you tonight, is from chapter 5. So if you know the Exodus text, you know the Exodus story, we are slaves in Egypt, and we have this big sort of almost, confrontation with Pharaoh. And the number one thing that Moses wants Pharaoh to do is to let our people go. And he goes to Pharaoh over and over again asking for this. If you look on chapter 5, verse 1, though, you'll see it's not so easy. It says, Afterward Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. And they answered, The God of the Hebrews has manifested himself to us. Let us go, we pray, a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he strike us with pestilence or sword. But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their tasks? Get to your labors. And Pharaoh continued, The people of the land are already so numerous, and you would have them cease for their labors. So here, Aaron and Moses came to Pharaoh asking to just go out for 3 days, not even to leave forever. And Pharaoh turns to him and says, Not only will I not let you go, but it seems like you're asking for too much. There's already too many people, and you're asking them to take a break. So where Moses and Aaron might think that they're beginning a negotiation with Pharaoh of how to get the Israelites out of Egypt, Pharaoh is already trying to shut the entire thing down. And where he anchors this in conversation is, you shouldn't get any break at all. So we have this really important moment. And then it goes on. It says, That same day Pharaoh charged the taskmasters and foremen of people, saying, You shall no longer provide the people with straw for making bricks, as they did before, and let them go and gather the straw for themselves, but impose upon them the same quota of bricks as they've been making heretofore, and do not reduce it. For they are shirkers, and when they cry, Let us go and sacrifice to our God, let heavier work be laid upon the men, let them keep it and not pay attention to deceitful promises. So the taskmasters and the foremen of the people went out to the people and said, Thus said Pharaoh, I won't give you any straw. So here's what we're looking at. Not only do the Israelites don't get to leave to go on a 3-day break to go and leave slavery, Pharaoh makes it more difficult. Pharaoh actually takes away the means of production. It takes away the straw without dropping the quota. So we're entering into the crux of this crisis of the Exodus at this moment. This is the moment where it doesn't look like things are going well. The plagues haven't really heaped on yet. Pharaoh certainly hasn't changed his mind by any means. In fact, he's making life much, much, much more difficult. As the text continues, it says that the Israelites scattered throughout the land of Egypt, of all of Egypt, to try to gather little stubbles for straw. And the taskmasters pressed them, saying, You must complete the same assignment each day with the straw that you find. And the foremen of the Israelites then, so now another group is getting involved. These are the leaders of the Israelites who are not Aaron and not Moses. And these are the ones that the taskmasters said over them were beaten. And why were they asked, Did you not complete the prescribed amount of bricks, either yesterday or today, or as you did before? Then the foreman of the Israelites came to Pharaoh and cried, Why do you deal thus with your servants? No straw is issued to your servants that they demand of us make bricks. Thus your servants are being beaten, when the fault is with your own people. And he replied, You are shirkers, that is why you say, Let us go and sacrifice to God. Be off with you to your work. No straw shall be issued to you. You must produce your quota of bricks. And now the foremen of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order. You must not reduce this quantity. So now, in addition to Pharaoh putting a punishment on the Israelites, and Aaron and Moses beginning to lose control of the situation, these foremen, this group that we haven't even heard of before, come and they try to bargain on their own behalf without Aaron and without Moses to Pharaoh to try to lessen the load. And of course, Pharaoh takes this opportunity to push them down and to beat them down farther. So now we have 3 groups all fighting with each other instead of just 2 groups. And then as they left Pharaoh's presence, as the foremen, these folks who are not Aaron and not Moses, who were trying to go and negotiate on behalf of the Israelites. As they left Pharaoh's presence, they came upon Moses and Aaron standing in their path. And they said to them, "May the Lord look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in the hands to slay us." And then Moses returned to the Lord and said, "O Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with his people, and still you have not delivered your people." Here is the center of the story. I mean, imagine this. Have you ever had this situation where you're trying to make something happen, and then your best friend just kind of throws you under the bus? Or you're trying to make dinner for the kids, and then your husband or your wife comes home with a pizza? Or you said no screen time, and the dad says, "Hey, let's watch TV." It's like anytime you try to play your game and try to live up to the level that you're supposed to live, and something just comes from the other side and just takes you out at the knees, and you're not even sure what to do. That's exactly what's happening in this story. Aaron and Moses are trying to go to Pharaoh to argue to let the people go, to make the pitch, the big pitch of the Exodus. And these foremen come in and they try to do the same thing without Aaron and Moses, and they end up just taking them out. And in the end, Moses is standing there not knowing what to do. Aaron is standing there not knowing what to do. The entire story, everything that has been prepped up until this point, from going into the desert to being excited to seeing the burning bush and coming back to this moment, everything is called into question. Everything that they thought was going to come true doesn't look like it's going to come true. The Exodus story might not happen. The Israelites themselves are angry at their leadership, not just angry at Pharaoh. And so here, Aaron and Moses don't know what to do. So, of course, what does Moses do? He turns to God, and he says, "God, what am I supposed to do?" It's like, I'm going to kick this up the chain. I'm going to kick this all the way up. I don't know. What are we supposed to do? And here, Moses calls out God and says, "You haven't done your job. You haven't delivered the people." So again, it's really interesting because in this moment of crisis, we have everyone turning on each other. We have obviously Pharaoh playing the part of Pharaoh. We have Aaron and Moses not succeeding. We have these foremen who are leading basically a rebellion against Aaron and Moses. And then finally we have Moses rebelling against God. Everyone is in this moment of crisis. And it's in that moment that everything begins to turn and change. In Hollywood, they call this the all is lost moment. It's that moment, where it looks like the ship is going down, or the war is about to be lost, or the fire is going to consume the forest, or the rebels aren't going to beat the evil empire. Whatever that moment is, it's called all is lost. And that's what this moment is. It feels all is lost. And I want to point this out because for so many people I've talked to today and yesterday, they're starting to feel that way. They're starting to feel that this is a all is lost type moment. With the virus and people being shut inside, you can go to the grocery store and it certainly feels like all is lost. I never knew that people cared about a dozen eggs as much as they cared about a dozen eggs in this crisis. You see, for the most part, people are being okay, but I'm fielding a lot of calls around anxiety and stress in those moments. And what Moses did in that moment, returning to God, is one option. But we see these crises, and in some ways it's a model of what not to do. Right? It's a model of how you shouldn't go around someone's back to try to solve a problem for them that they need to solve themselves. And they should, in this deep moment of crisis, if you want to build resiliency, which is what we're getting to, the model of the Exodus in this moment might not be the right model, which is okay. Of course, we know what happens starting the next day. The story which was going down starts to go back up, which is what we need and what we should talk about in a minute. I want to, while we're sort of in the down part, the darkness part, I want to look at this text from Pirkei Avot, which is the next text in your packet. It's about how bad it can get. And oh, by the way, if you have comments or anything you want to say or do, just say or bring up, just go ahead and type them into the comments, and I'll try to answer questions along the way. I don't have my keyboard, but I can definitely try to answer some questions if you have them as they come along. So in Pirkei Avot, let's just set the tone here. The Mishnah, which is what this comes from, was codified between the year 150 and 200 in the Common Era. So it was a generation after the destruction of the temple. And we were already going into exile. And we were dealing with a occupied people, a people that had lost its hegemony, a nation that had lost control, and that were leaving history. And the writers, the Avot, the fathers of the Mishnah, were trying to come up a way of teaching their children how to be right in the world in the face of such a catastrophe. And they wrote this book, and it has 6 chapters, 5 we know for sure, 6 possibly. And this is towards the middle of the 5th chapter, so we're pretty deep into it. And they want to basically say, here's a bottom line. Here's something you should think about. And this is what they taught. They said there are Arba midot ba'adam. There are 4 types of characters of human beings. There is the one, ha'omer sheli sheli v'shelcha shelcha. There is one that says what's mine is mine and yours is yours. This is the Benoni. This is the common type. And there are some that say, what is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. And this is the Sodom type, which we'll get back to. And then there's one that says, what is mine is yours and yours is mine, is an unlearned type, someone who doesn't know very much. And then there's one that says, what is mine is yours and yours is yours. That's a pious type. That's called a chassid, or chassid in Hebrew. And finally, there's the one that says, what's mine is mine and yours is mine. That's a wicked person. So they want to talk about 4 different types of characters. And you got to, again, just to set the tone, it's in this place of newly found exile, and when everything feels like it was getting out of control. And there are 4 types. The wicked one is pretty obvious. The wicked one says, what is mine is mine and what is yours is also mine. This idea of taking everything and giving nothing, that is a wicked stereotype. Although I think many of us sometimes feel that way. I think that when you're in a moment of crisis and you don't know what's going to happen next, you certainly want to take what's yours. And you're probably, some of us, I know it, are itching also to maybe say what is someone else's, maybe I should take too. Like maybe that's something I should grab onto also. But they call that is the wicked type. That is the type that we want to avoid altogether. And in many ways, when you're responding to a crisis and you're that kind of person, which we hope you're not, but if you are, that's not one way to respond. That's not resiliency. That's just turning dark. That's turning wicked. And then you have the pious person. And we know people like this too. These are people who said, look, what's mine is yours. And what's yours is yours. I'll give you everything. It's kind of like the giving tree, right? And we love people like that. We want our moms and our dads to be like that. But if you don't take what's yours, or you could end up with nothing. And as pious as you are, and that's a really wonderful thing, it's not entirely realistic. So there is this other type, though, that I want to touch on really quickly, which is what's called midat stom, which is the midah, or the character type of someone who's characterized as a Sodomite, someone from the city of Sodom. And if you remember, just out of reference for the city of Sodom, that's the city that was destroyed in the book of Genesis, right? Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is the one that I find most interesting in this context. So it says, V'yesh omrim zo midot stom, sheli shelcha v'shelcha sheli. Right? So what is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. I mean, think about that for a minute. Like, it's almost like Purim Torah. It's like this topsy-turvy world where one thing is right and another thing is wrong. And I think what they're trying to say is that in that context, when values become so switched, that's a context that we should also avoid. That's not resiliency. That's confusion. And I think one of the things that we do in our times of panic is to dive into this confusion, where what I think is mine, I'm just going to give to you, and what's yours, I think I'm entitled to. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. All right. So when the rabbis look at these 4 character types, what they're really talking is about how bad it can get when you go into exile, when you go into a sense of occupation, when you are taken down or in crisis, right? I see, Elon, what you're saying. It's like kibbutz, like sharing, but I would say that the kibbutz model would not be that model. The kibbutz model is what is mine is ours, or what is ours is ours. Like, it's not that I own anything at all. The topsy-turvy piece is in a world that isn't a socialist world like you would find on a kibbutz. That's how I read it. If we lived in this world where we moved from singular possession to communal possession, then you would be right. But I think it's really more about turning the entire foundation on its head, the foundation of society. And I think that's how bad it can get in this situation. So if you go to the next section, though, I would like to take the next maybe 15, 20 minutes to go through what I think are some models of resiliency we find in Jewish literature, and both from the Tanakh and from further on. So in the Tanakh, my favorite text in the Tanakh when thinking about these issues is the creation story. And if you just go to that one, it'd be really great. So the first model is to have faith. And maybe it's not just faith in God. Maybe it's faith in the future. Maybe it's faith in the unknown. I think many of us have faith in one way or another, whether it's in the personhood of God or the idea of love or the idea of truth or justice. We want to have faith in something that we don't necessarily hold or equivocate with other things. And so the model for having faith comes right out of the Bible, comes out of the Torah. And I think when I think about faith, I also think about God's faith and God's faith in us. And so in Breshit, in the beginning of Breshit, it says, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. When God created the world at the very beginning of the Bible, God created the world out of the earth that was unformed and void. It says, v'haaretz haita tohu v'vohu. It was unformed. It was void. It was a seeping mass of nothingness. And God floated above the deep. And God looked out at that chaos, at that darkness, and said, Yehi or, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light was good, and God separated that light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and God called the night, God called the night evening or Lila. And there was evening and there was morning, a first day. So the thing that's really interesting here is, you look at this text. So the first thing is, when God looked out at the universe, or God looked out at the world, it wasn't like there was nothing there. There was material, primordial material, but it was all chaos and crazy. There was no foundation. There was no straight lines. There was light and darkness were all mixed up, and God said, let there be light. And God used that light with the darkness and separated them, and he called the light good. I mean, I think it's really important that there's a moral value to this, to naming the chaos. When you are in a place where you feel overwhelmed or senseless, or you feel you have no control, the first thing you want to do is to name the fact that you feel like you have no control, or that you feel overwhelmed, or that you're afraid, or that you have anxiety. When you can name something, you can then begin to manipulate it. Not in a bad way, but you'll be able to interact with it. Because then when you name it separate from you, it's not just you grappling with stuff inside. You're grappling with this thing, and you can begin to change. And that's exactly what God did. God looked at the chaos and named it, and changed it, and created the world. And there was evening and morning the first day. So the first thing I come out of this is that God used the chaos to create the world. And the chaos has a way of seeping back in, kind of erupts. Whether someone gets sick, or society seems to be a little broken, or there's a war, or famine, or something, the chaos seems to seep in. But the job there, I think, is to be able to name it and then use that chaos to create something better. Which leads me to my second point about this one text, why it's so deep and why I love it so much. You think about it. What question was God answering by creating the world? What question was God answering by deciding to create the world? I mean, if God in the story is this forever entity that existed way before the world ever existed, what question did God ask God's self such that the answer was to create the world? It's the greatest question of the Torah, I think. And to me, I can come up with only one or two questions. The first is, God said to God's self, I don't want to be alone. That there's loneliness in chaos, especially if you feel like you're the only one going through it. And so God asks God's self, is it better to live with a universe of which I'm part but not entirely part of, or is it better to be alone? And God decided in that moment before the first word was ever written to create the world. And so the Torah is an answer to God's question, the question of existence itself. And I find a lot of faith in that. And the second one, which I think takes this a little bit further, is that we don't necessarily all have faith in God, but if we take the Bible seriously, that means that God has faith in us. That God has faith in each of us. That each of us will be imperfect and broken and will live, will exist, will grow, will break, will get sick, will die. But the fact that the world exists at all is an answer to a question. And that question is, what does God have faith in? And God has faith in us. And that's why I love this text, because one of the ways that you can be resilient in times of crisis is to have faith in something greater than yourself, something beyond yourself. Could be in the future. Could be in what we're doing in the project you're creating. Could be in your family. And could be in God. Which takes me to the next text. This one is a very powerful text. It comes from a writer whose name became H Kodesh, which means the holy fire. The rabbi who was known as H Kodesh was the chief rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1930 to 1941. He was captured and sent into the camps. And he saw his world fall apart all around him. He knew what was coming, and he couldn't stop it. He couldn't fight against it. And he still had to preach. Could you imagine going to Shabbat services in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1941? This is Parshat Shoftim, so it would be in the September 1941. What would you preach if you were the rabbi in the ghetto? What would you say to your community when they heard rumors of people being, rounded up and taken away, never to be seen again? And he wrote each of his weekly sermons down, and he buried them and hid them, and they were found after the war, and it became this book called the H Kodesh, the Holy Fire. And so this is what he wrote. He wrote, "It is clear amidst all this suffering that if only everyone knew that they would be rescued tomorrow, then a great majority, even of those who have already despaired, would be able to find courage. The problem is they can't see any end to the darkness. Many find nothing with which to bolster their spirits, and so God forbid they despair and become dispirited. This is the meaning of beguileless, sincere God, your Lord. Even if you are broken and oppressed, nevertheless, be whole. Take strength in God, your Lord, because you know that God, your Lord, is with you in your suffering. Do not attempt to project into the future. saying, I cannot see an end to the darkness, but simply accept whatever happens to you, and then you will be with God, and to be his portion. Then, naturally, your salvation will draw to a close. For as Moshe said in Deuteronomy, they are your people and your inheritance. What powerful words by the H Kodesh. He said that essentially those who believe in faith, those who have faith in a future, those who have faith in a God, those who have faith that the darkness will end, are the ones who can muster the courage. Maybe the courage to fight back, the courage to try to redeem themselves, the courage to face a terrible future. Resiliency doesn't necessarily mean fixing the problem. Resiliency means wrestling with problems beyond our control and finding a way through that darkness by believing in something greater than ourselves. When he says over and over again to believe in God, which might be a hard thing for folks who don't believe in God, it's nice to think that God believes in you and that God is with you in your suffering. And for him, a religious man facing the fires of Auschwitz, to write this, it's itself a holy act and an act of courage. And so one of the things that holds us together when we're in crisis or times of deep stress is to have faith in a greater project. And this isn't just true in religious literature. We know it's true from psychological literature, that if you believe that your life is part of a greater narrative, then any particular setback you feel or experience, you can reset in the context of a greater narrative that leads to goodness. And we see that over and over again. If you understand that, if you understand this sense of faith, you can actually stave off depression, you can stave off addiction, you can stave off schizophrenia. And that's borne out in a large number of literature. Many of the professors who work on that have actually spoken of EBS, including Dr. David Rossmarin, who runs the Center for Anxiety at Harvard, and Lisa Miller, who runs the Center for Spiritual Care at Columbia University, and even in our ruler program through our day school, which deals mostly with the social emotional aspect of young people, that those professors from those universities all echo essentially what the H Kodesh said 100 years ago, which was that when you have faith in a greater narrative, you can face great challenges, but you can recontext and repurpose those challenges in an arc towards redemption. And that's one of the ways that we show resiliency, is by doing that. A second model, not unlike the first, is now to take those beliefs and put them into action. To say, okay, my life is really challenging right now. What am I going to do about it? Not just what I'm going to believe in it. And as you know, Judaism isn't just a cluster of ideas and faiths. We believe in mitzvot. We believe in actual actions. And our actions are just as important as what we study and how we believe and pray and do. So in Breshit Rabbah, which is the next text, instead of just believing in God, which is one model, is to act godly, is to take the values of our tradition and live them out, regardless of how the world sees you. What's most important is how you see yourself. And in Breshit Rabbah, the text is, if you remember, Abraham is asked to leave his land, his birthplace, very late in life. He lived an entire life with his wife Sarai, and then he needed to then, was asked by God to go to the land of Canaan, or land that was shown. And that's the beginning of the story of the Jewish people. And the rabbis asked this really interesting question, is why did it take so long? And what was it that God was asking Avram to do? Because it wasn't clear in that text. And so in the second section here of acting godly, I want to just read this out to you. God said to Avram, "Go forth from your land." And Rabbi Yitzchak opened his verse, his lecture, saying, "Take heed, lass, and note. Take heed, young one, and note. Incline your ear, forget your people and your father's house." Rabbi Yitzchak said, "This may be compared to a man who is traveling from place to place, And when he saw a bira doleket, he said, is it possible that this bira lacks a person to look after it? So what he saw was what's called a bira doleket, and that's a very famous story. The word bira means either a palace or a castle of some sort, and the word doleket means lit up. So there's two ways of looking at this. Either he's walking in the dark and he sees a palace all lit up with lights, and he's asking a question of something that he's noticing, or he's walking in the dark and sees a palace that's on fire, because the word doleket also means to be engulfed in flames. And so the Rabbi Yitzchak is what he's trying to say here is that when a person was traveling from place to place, he saw this house that was all lit up or on fire. And he said, is it possible that this bira lacks a person to look after it? The owner looked out and said, I am the owner. Similarly, because Avraham, our father, said, is it possible that the world has no guide, no one to look after it? The Holy Blessed One looked out and said to him, I am the master of the universe. Now, this text is really interesting because the question is, if the house is just lit up, then the owner of the house is taking care of the house. But if the house is on fire, then the owner of the house is neglecting the house. And it's a sort of a Zen koan, depending on how you look at this text. So one of the ways I like to look at this is to say, okay, if you look at the world and you just see how pleasant it is and how wonderful it is, then you ask your question, well, who rules the world? Who is in charge of the world? And if you look at the world and you see it on fire, then what are you going to do about it? And in the first version of the text, Avram is a prophet being called into service of God. And in the second version of the text, the version I want to focus on tonight, Avram is being called into fixing the world. He is meant to be God's servant to actually go out and take this world that's on fire and make it better. So what I want to say is that in moments of crisis, we can look at the world and say, it is just what it is, and I'm just going to let it go. Because I'm not the owner. I'm not the owner of the palace. The palace is beautiful. It's all lit up. It's gorgeous. Or you can look at the world in this other way and say the whole world is on fire, and I feel imbued with the responsibility to not only see that it's on fire, but to do something about it. And what do we know that Avram does? He ends up going across the world, saving people's lives, converting them, and trying to bring priests to the land and settle the land. And to me, that's one of the options that you have if you need to act with godliness, is to look at the world, see that it's on fire, and decide what you're going to do about it. And that might mean helping someone else, doing acts of chesed. Avram was known as the paragon of chesed in our tradition, and helping other people when they're down, when they're sad, when they're hurt, when they're lonely, when they're homeless, when they are on the heels of injustice, and doing something about it. So the second model of dealing with resilience in a time of crisis is to act out of your values, regardless of how they appear, because you're owning your own power as a Jew and as someone who cares about the world. Okay, now Ilan, I'll get to your question. I just wanted to finish that. Ilan says, light does not automatically follow darkness. Some Jews were not comforted, but rather took up arms, gave them purpose, even when they didn't succeed individually. That is very true, right? The Herzl and the Zionist culture that came out of that, and the partisans in the forests, they took up arms too. And again, I think one of the ways that you deal in times of crisis and being resilient is to make a decision whether or not you're going to have faith in God or maybe act godly. And in the case of the partisans, if that's what you're referring to, I don't know what they had faith in. Maybe they had faith in themselves, or they decided they needed to fight even if they knew they were going to lose. In which case they had faith in something greater that they couldn't see or they couldn't touch, but they could feel inside of themselves. Maybe it was a faith that history would judge the Nazis condemned the Nazis. Maybe it was faith that they at least stood up for their values and didn't go down without a fight. But all of those things are types of faith, in my opinion. All right, I want to get to the last model that I have for tonight, which is finding godliness within ourselves. So it's not just having faith in something out there, faith in a future, faith in love, faith in justice, faith in God. It's not just acting on a certain value path and living out your values, but now thinking about how inside of ourselves, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves in this psychological culture has almost always either really negative or really positive. We know people who are really positive, or at least they appear to be really positive, because they show up all over social media as living these perfect lives, and they're always happy. And then there's the rest of us who might have things that we feel sadly about ourselves all the time. And looking at our godliness within, looking at those little sparks within ourselves is one of the ways that we can be resilient. And let's just take a look here on the third section, if you still have the packet. So the book of Proverbs is a wonderful book of basically fortunes from fortune cookies, little pithy statements that just mean so much to each and every one of us. And it's an often overlooked book in our studies because there's no story, there's no narrative, but it's a wonderful way of sitting and thinking about the world. And in the 24th chapter of Proverbs, it says, 7 times the righteous man falls, or righteous person falls and gets up, while the wicked person is tripped by one misfortune. This to me is the model of resiliency itself. That 7 times a righteous person can fall and still get up, and a wicked person are tripped by one misfortune. I mean, think about that. Here in the book of Proverbs, resiliency is being married to righteousness. That this idea of being strong and being right means that you can face adversity after adversity after adversity, and you still get up, and you still fight, and you still believe in something. But a truly wicked person, someone who's frail and whose ego is on the line all the time, can be tripped up by one misfortune and be completely laid low. In the Hasidic literature, they liken this to a relationship between God and the human being, and that's in the Pri Tzadik text, which I gave next. It says, if Israel falls and stands, as it says, do not rejoice over me, over my enemy. Though I have fallen, I rise again. This is that, though through the act of falling, this is the reason that one rises. I love this text because if there's any people in the world, in the history of the world, that knows what it's like to be kicked out, to be cast about, to be pushed down, and to rise again, it's us. That's who we are. And what this Hasidic master is showing in the on his commentary on the book of Proverbs here is that the purpose of falling is not to rise, but through our falling, we can learn to rise. That is, the pain that you're experiencing in times of stress, in times of crisis, the sense of anxiety you might be feeling and unsettled feelings that you might be having, the reasons for that are psychological and they're political, they're sociological, and in today's environment, they're biological, but it's not meant to punish you for anything. But it's through the act of falling that you learn how to get back up again. Failure itself can lead to your own success. Being knocked down a little bit, having to stay home, having to be only with your family, being afraid to go out, being afraid for what society is telling you right now, it's a terrible thing, but through those failures, through those falling downs, we can learn to get back up. And the rabbis, then he goes on to say, the rabbis say that downward motion for the sake of upward motion. This is an old Hasidic idea that the energy that flows down and that feels negative is actually for the sake of uplift. That God casts down energy so that we can pick it back up again. And the idea there is that our opportunities when we see darkness is to help us dream about what is the world you want to create. Going back to that Genesis text. If chaos presents itself to you, the question that's beset before you is the same question that was beset before God before creating the world, which is this the world you want to live in, or do you want to create a different world? And if you want to create a different world, then you have to create a different world. And so 7 times a righteous man falls and gets up. That's specifically that through falling, through a world of chaos as it presents itself to us, we can get back up again. And then I want to close by reading this wonderful letter. A yeshiva student who was really struggling wrote a letter to the head of the school. And he asked whether or not he had a place in God's house, because he wasn't sure, because he wasn't understanding everything that was happening in the yeshiva. He felt really that he wasn't the smartest kid in the class, and that he felt like maybe he didn't belong. He was someone who didn't fit in. And it's just a really, really powerful letter. And the response from a teacher, I think every teacher should have this kind of response to their students. He writes to his student, "Your letter reached my hand, and your words touched my heart. Know, my friend, that your very letter belies the descriptions that it contains." And now let me explain that statement. It is a terrible problem that when we discuss the greatness of our gedolim, our great scholars of the age, we actually deal only with the end of their stories. We tell about their perfection, but we omit any mention of their inner battles, which raged in their souls. The impression one gets is that they were created with their full stature. For example, everyone is impressed by the purity of the Chafetz Chaim, who wrote a whole tractate on being perfect in speech. He was the one that hated Lashon Hara. However, who knows about all the wars, the battles, the impediments, the downfalls, the retreats that the Chafetz Chaim experienced in his fight with the evil inclination? As a result of this gap in our knowledge of these great scholars, when a young man who is imbued with the Holy Spirit and with ambition experiences impediments and downfalls, he believes that he's not planted in the house of God, house of Hashem. This is because this young man thinks that being planted in God's house means experiencing tranquility of the soul in lush meadows and beside tranquil waters. However, know, my friend, that the key for your soul is not the tranquility of the Yetzer HaTov, of the good inclination, of that part of us that feels good about the things of who we are and what we do, but the war against the Yetzer Hara, that voice inside of us that tells us we're never good enough, or that voice that tells us we're not smart enough, or that we're not capable enough to get through this challenge. Your letter testifies that you are a faithful warrior in the army of the Yetzer HaTov. You are a good warrior who fights for goodness in the world. There's a saying in English. Remember, this letter was written in Yiddish. So there's a saying in English: lose the battle and win the war. You surely have stumbled and will stumble again, and you will be vanquished in many battles. However, I promise you that after you have lost those battles, you will emerge from the war with a victor's wreath on your head. The wisest of all men, King Solomon, said, "The tzaddik will fall 7 times and he will rise." The unlearned think that this means even though the tzaddik falls 7 times, he will rise. The wise know well what the meaning really is. It's because a tzaddik falls 7 times, he will rise. On the verse in the book of Genesis, "And God saw what he had made was very good," the Midrash comments, God refers to goodness as the Yetzer HaTov, but very good to the Yetzer Hara. And in this line with the Midrash, Rabbi Hunter continues, "If you had written to me of your mitzvot and your good deeds, I would have said it was a good letter. Now that you tell me of your fails and your stumbles, I say that I received a very good letter. Please don't picture yourself that a Gadol and his Yetzer HaTov are one and the same. Rather, imagine the Gadolim at war with all types of base tendencies." What he's saying here is so powerful to this student who's struggling. He says, "To my dear student, you should know that when a righteous person falls and 7 times he will rise, it's not because every time that he falls he gets up, but it's because that he falls, that is the reason why he gets up. Because a tzaddik falls 7 times, he will rise." And here, he's really getting to the heart of finding that place inside of yourself. Finding that place inside of yourself that says, don't look at the world and everyone else's success and believe that their life is perfect. Don't look at other people's vacations and other people's houses. Don't look at other people's lives and think of their smarts or their wealth and think that they're successful. Look into your own heart and realize that each and every one of us has stories and battles that we never tell anyone else. And that if you really want to have resiliency in this time of crisis, in this time of stress, when we're all home and we're all away from each other, then we have to look into our own hearts and say, it's because we fall that we can get back up. The world seems a little unsettled right now. It feels like the foundations of the earth are sitting on quicksand, and we're all not sure what the future is. But the best response to an unknown future is to look inside of ourselves and say, we will rise. We will beat this. We will get together. We will build the world that we dream of. And so those are my 3 tips for resiliency in a time of crisis. Number 1 is to have faith in something greater than yourself. Put all of your challenges in the context of a greater narrative, whether it's faith in God or faith in love or faith in the future or faith in family. The second is to live out your values. Know that you are who you are and to live them out. And if you see the world is on fire, then to do something about it. And thirdly is to look inside yourself and say, it's because when we fall, that gives us the opportunity to rise again. And with that, I want to wish everyone a wonderful evening. Again, please make sure that you like our Facebook page if you can. Share the video, share all the other content. Tomorrow morning, we pick back up again with morning services at 7:30, right back here at the Valley B'Shalom page. I want to thank all my friends who are watching. I see you, Rosalind. I see you, Gloria. I see you, Doran. I saw Rabbi Feinstein there for a minute, and Matt and Debbie, and Lois Weinschaff and Morris and Elon. Thank you for adding your comments, and Judy. All the folks who have been, Shirley, of course, and Laura and Susan. And my wife is on there. That's nice. Nice to see you, honey. And Jane, of course, and my good student Doug, and all those else who have been being part of tonight's broadcast, tonight's live video. I wish you a wonderful evening. Get some rest, and we'll see you in the morning.